Hi, it's Josh, and I've got some interesting news about Ineos pricing that might not quite be what it seems on the surface. So, Ineos just announced some price drops on the Grenadier lineup here in the US, and while that sounds like a great news for potential buyers, I want to dig into what's really happening here because it's more to the story than just meets the eye. According to the latest report from Automotive News, Ineos has lowered prices following what they're calling signs of softening demand for their body-on-frame trucks. But here's the thing, and this is what I want you to really understand. These aren't actually price decreases in the traditional sense. What we're seeing primarily is a rollback of tariff-induced pricing, and the prices overall still exceed what they were in 2024. Let me break down a couple numbers for you. And again, this is of August in 2025. The Grenadier station wagon now starts at $72,600, which is down 9.8% from the previous starting price of $80,500. Now, this one's actually a bit different than what I was saying about rollbacks because the base Grenadier started at $76,700 prior to the tariffs going into effect in April. So at $72,600, we're actually seeing a price that's about $4,100 lower than the pre-tariff levels. So the base model is generally getting a price reduction below where we were before the tariff mess started. But that's a base model, no options, and there's been a little chess playing with the options from what I can see on the configurator. Now, if you watch my previous video on how will the EU tariffs change Ineos Grenadier prices in 25, you'll remember that Ineos raised vehicle prices between 4.9% and 11% in April of 2025 as a direct result of the tariffs. And what we're seeing now is them trying to find a middle ground. The higher Trailmaster and Fieldmaster trims are now starting at $80,600, down 8.9% from $88,500. But again, they started at $84,700 before the tariffs hit. And the Quartermaster pickup, it's now starting at $86,000, down from $94,500, but it was $85,500 before the tariffs. Here's what's really happened. At the beginning of the model year 2025, Ineos took what I'd call a healthy price increase, and that's just normal business, right? Inflation, increased costs, and all that stuff. But then they also had to deal with the tariff boost, which was substantial and unforeseen at the beginning of the year. The bulk of this new price reduction is simply rolling back the tariff-induced pricing and not giving us substantially better deals on what we had before. And to be fair, let's talk about what Ineos is dealing with here. As a British startup shipping vehicles from France, they're particularly vulnerable to these trade disputes. The US is their largest market, and North America accounts for more than 60% of global sales. It really puts into perspective how critical the US market is for them. The vehicles exported from the EU face a 27.5% tariff, though there's talk that that could be reduced to 15% as part of the potential trade deal. But here's where it gets really complicated for the Quartermaster. It's still also subject to the 25% chicken tax because it's built in France and imported as a pickup truck. So you're looking at tariffs stacked on tariff, and there's no rolling back the chicken tax as it dates back to 1964 and can only be solved if Ineos builds Quartermasters here in the US. I guess that's protectionism at its finest. Lynn Calder, the CEO, put out a statement saying she was relieved that the overall tariff deal had been reached, noting that 15% is a significant uplift in cost for our fledgling business. And she's right. This company is still finding its footing, and these trade disputes have potential to really damage their growth trajectory. Now, I want to address something that I know you're probably thinking, Josh, these prices are still too high. And look, I get it, but before you leave that as a comment, I want you to think about what body-on-frame 4x4 off-roader you're planning to buy instead. Because here's the reality. If you think you were going to bypass tariffs by buying domestic, you might be in for a surprise. Of course, assembling a car in the U.S. doesn't mean that all the parts were made here in the U.S. Ford, GM, and Stellantis are already pausing production in anticipation of lower sales because they know their costs are going up too. The automotive supply chain is global. And when you start throwing tariffs around, everybody gets hit eventually. What I find interesting is that Ineos is really trying to protect their customers here. They're absorbing a significant portion of these tariff costs rather than passing them all along. That's not something every manufacturer would do, especially in a smaller company that's building their market presence. The timing of this is particularly challenging because Ineos is just starting to hit their stride in the US market. Their dealer network is expanding. They're on track for 40 dealership sites across the US and Canada by the end of the year. Customer deliveries of the Quartermaster just began this year. This is exactly the wrong time to be dealing with pricing volatility. If you visit the US Ineos Grenadier website configurator to build your Grenadier, you will notice that the process no longer lists prices other than the main vehicle price. No idea about what options cost at the moment, no totals, and all you can do is submit your build to a dealer for a quote. I don't like that, and I hope they sort that out, as I spent many hours bouncing between options and pricing to build what I thought was the best value for my Grenadier as I was planning to use it. I do not write blank checks, and I don't expect you to either. Here's what I think the real takeaway is from all this. Ineos is caught in the middle of the trade dispute, and they have no control over it. They're doing their best to balance keeping their vehicles accessible while not destroying their business model. The price drops that we're seeing aren't really drops, they're adjustments back toward reality after the tariff shock. If you've been waiting to buy a Grenadier, you need to understand that these current prices, while lower than peak tariff pricing, are still higher than pre-2025 levels. You're not getting a deal compared to last year. You're getting less of a tariff penalty. The bigger question is what happens next? Will these trade negotiations actually result in lower tariffs? And will Ineos be able to maintain the pricing levels if their costs keep going up? And frankly, will the market accept the price points long term? At some level, they will. Ineos needs to decide if they desire fewer sales for higher prices or higher volume at lower prices. And the balancing point is likely keeping the factory at optimal production levels for economic efficiency. I think Ineos is betting on their unique positioning. They're the only new body-on-frame SUV pickup in this space, which will justify pricing. But they're also clearly watching their sales numbers closely. The fact that registrations dropped 23% in June and 14% in the first half of the year tell you that price sensitivity is real. For those of you that have been patiently waiting for your 2025 orders, this pricing situation is probably frustrating. You're paying more than 2024 buyers, but less than you would have at peak tariff pricing. It's not ideal, but it's the reality of the current trade environment. My advice? If you're serious about getting a Grenadier, don't wait for prices to go back to 2024 levels, and inquire to your dealer about their August 2025 pricing rollbacks. Overall, the new normal is higher pricing, but these current reduced prices might be as good as it gets for a while. I'll definitely keep you posted if there's any more developments on the tariff front with Ineos and they make any other pricing announcements. The whole situation's still evolving, and I suspect we haven't seen the end of the adjustments just yet. What do you think? Are you still considering a Grenadier at these price points? Or have the tariff situations pushed you towards other options or into the wait and watch column? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear how this is affecting your buying decision. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.